Hey y'all, Southern Style Gaming here, and today I want to talk about one of my favorite books, this being the short story by Fritz Leiber called A Pail of Air. Now, I absolutely love this story. It's a post-apocalyptic sci-fi short story. Now, it was written in the 50s, so some of the science is off, but I just absolutely love the writing. I love the storytelling. I just think it's a fantastic book. If you haven't read it yet or you haven't listened to it, you should go read it. It's available for free on multiple platforms. There are multiple videos on YouTube that you can go listen to it for free. The Vintage Sci-Fi podcast has a great reading of it. It's 38 minutes long, so it's not like, you're not listening to a Harry Potter novel or anything, but it's a great story. And, if you haven't read it, go read it. But if you don't want to read it, but you still want to listen to this video, I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown. Now, spoiler alerts from here on out. I am going to be spoiling, the main plot point of the story. So just be warned. I am going to spoil things here. So, the whole book is based around basically this one singular event that happened. And that was a rogue star, a dead star, coming through the solar system and ripping the Earth away out of its orbit, away from the gravitational pull of the sun. And this family basically finds refuge in this old apartment building, and they basically just live there for the decades following this event. So, my fan theory here that I'm going to be going on is that Pa, the father of the main character, it's centered around him. So there are some suspicious circumstances surrounding him and a group of his friends that basically formed this independent research group around the time that this event took place. So now, none of these characters, none of the four characters are ever actually named. They're just Ma, Pa, sister, and the main character. So I do find it really interesting that you become so attached to these characters in such a short amount of time, and you literally never even learn their names. It's one of the great things about the writing in this story that I absolutely love. I think it just shows how great of a story it is. But, so this is basically how it goes. Around the time that what they call the Big Jerk, which was basically the moment where the dead star ripped the Earth away from the gravitational pull of the sun, the moment at which that happened. Pa and some of his friends, as I said, they basically created this independent research group to figure out what was going to happen, how it would go down, what all of the after effects would be. And they built this bunker, and that's where they were going to ride this thing out. Well, as the star approached and the gravitational struggle between the sun and this dead star took place, there were basically tons of earthquakes that were going on, and they destroyed this bunker. And as this bunker was being destroyed by the earthquakes, all of Pa's friends conveniently died. Now, I don't want to say conveniently because, this fan theory very well could not be true. But I am going to discuss why I personally believe it to be true. I'm also going to discuss a couple problems it has, but I want to argue my case here. My belief is that whether indirectly or directly, Pa had something to do with the death of his friends during those earthquakes destroying the bunker. So, now, my first bit of evidence here is very circumstantial and could kind of be explained with, other possibilities. So basically, the way that we're told about the events that unfold during the Big Jerk and the years after is that at the very beginning of the story, the sun goes out to scoop up some air. And to explain this, basically, if this ever were to happen in real life, this is scientifically what would happen. Eventually the Earth would get so far away that the atmosphere would literally freeze. And the oxygen in the air would fall to Earth as snow. So that's what happens in the story. So the sun actually goes outside with a pail and scoops up some of that air snow to bring it back inside and heat it up on the fire so that the family can breathe. Like that's why the story is called A Pail of Air, because that's how they have to survive, that's how they have to breathe, is by out and literally scooping up a pail of air, bringing it back inside to warm it up. So, enough rambling about that. Anyway, so what happens is the sun goes outside, and he goes to scoop up a pail of the air, and he sees a light in one of the other buildings. Now, this is explained later on in the story, but basically he goes back inside, tells everyone that he saw something, and everyone gets kind of riled up. So to calm everyone down, the son is like, "Hey, Pa, why don't you tell us the story about what happened?" So Pa goes into it. He talks about, the big jerk, and he talks about how everyone kind of freaked out when they first found out about the rogue star. How it could have possibly hit the sun, then it could have possibly hit the earth, but then everybody kind of figured out, yeah, it's just going to go by us, but it could rip us away from the sun, so who knows what's going to happen. So, in the process of telling that story, Pa always, and this is what the son says, always seems to get leery around the subject of discussing his friends. Now, this could possibly be explained by him just, not being fond of talking about the deaths of his close friends. But me personally, given the other evidence, I think this is guilt. I think Pa is feeling guilty about how he may have possibly been responsible for the deaths of his friends. That's just my 2 cents on it. But now for the real meat of the evidence that leads me to believe that Pa was responsible for their deaths. Now, the main reason I believe this is because supplies. Like, here's the thing. They have been trapped where they're living at in this place that they call the Nest. They've been there for at least 11 years, at the very least. Because the son is 10 years old. It's made very clear by the story that he was conceived after the events of the big jerk and everything basically settling back down. It's made very clear that he was conceived after that point. So, they also kind of make it sound as though there were a gap of potential years between the big jerk and the son's conception. Like, Pa, he talks about how there was a time, in the beginning, it was just him and Ma, and how, they just had to support each other, and how it was just them watching the fire. I'll get to that in a minute. So, it makes it sound like there's years here that it was just those two. And again, that's just my interpretation. I could very well be wrong. It could have just been an emotional roller coaster ride of a few months. And I mean, it is a post-apocalyptic world, so, emotions are probably high as it is. So, who knows? Anything could be possible. But in my opinion, at the least, we're talking about 13 years here. I'm going to set that limit. 13 years. I feel like that's the very least that we could reasonably be talking about here, between where the story is at now and the big jerk. So, 13 years of supplies of food and coal in particular. Now, the food, I think you can kind of stretch and say maybe this is believable, because they do live in an apartment complex, and at the very least, they do have sort of, this sort of home-rigged apparatus where they can go out, they can breathe, for long enough to go out and get, pails of air. They can go to the basement of this apartment building, which I'm assuming they're at least up on the 5th or 6th floor. But, they can go all the way out to the basement of this apartment building to get coal from the furnace. They can go to the ground floor to get the water from the actual water snow that's on the ground. But, I still have a hard time believing that they have had at least 13 years of like canned food or boxed food to feed a family of 4 for 13 years out of just this one apartment complex. I find that hard to believe. I also find it hard to believe that even with a furnace room in the basement, and this one I think is a little more hard to believe, that they've just had 13 years of coal stockpiled. I do think that was really strange. And again, I don't know, maybe coal consumption for a furnace of that size would just be absolutely gigantic. And just in case, they would have like loads and loads of coal on the reserve. So I don't know, maybe everyone in the apartment building was avid grillers. I don't know. I'm trying to give the benefit of the doubt here. So maybe those two things are conceivable on the fringe. I still don't really find it easy to believe, but you can make an argument that it is somewhat believable given the absolute best circumstances. However, the one thing that I find a little too hard to believe are the blankets. So, basically, they're all living in one room of this apartment, which they have affectionately dubbed the nest. And this room is quite literally surrounded by 30 plus blankets. Many of them are foil lined. It's in an attempt to keep as much air as possible from escaping, and also to keep the room warm. And I just find it really hard to believe that he just had 30 plus of these foil lined blankets just lying around. I don't know, maybe not all of them are foil lined. Maybe Ma just knitted them all. But again, these are things that I just find very hard to believe that it all just came together. Enough food to feed at least 4 people for 10 years and 2 people for at least 3 before that. Again, I find that difficult to believe. I find it even more difficult to believe that there is a large enough coal supply to leave a fire burning for 13 years non-stop in a world that is getting increasingly cold. I mean, at one point, it is stated that the Earth is out past the orbit of Pluto. I mean, we're talking about near true 0 degrees temperatures. And the story actually says this at one point, that the actual temperature outside is near true 0. I'm not sure if that's the actual scientific name for it. I know it's something like that. But there's like a literal 0 degrees where it cannot get any colder. It is not possible to get any colder. And it is near that temperature now. You're telling me that it doesn't take a hellacious amount of coal to keep that fire burning. And mind you, the fire has to be at least large enough to boil water, boil air, and cook food. You have to have the space. Cook food for 4 people, no less. You have to have the space on this fire to do all of these things. And in reality, you also want the fire to be hot enough to heat the whole space, which, in a world which is near absolute 0, I think that's it, absolute 0. In a world that is very close to absolute 0, that's going to take a lot of energy to burn, to create that much heat. I just find it very hard to believe that all of these things just perfectly came together by themselves, and that there wasn't any sort of foul play on the part of Pa. But you never know. Maybe I'm wrong. I could very well be wrong about all of this. Personally, I do believe that Pa was at least indirectly responsible for the deaths of all his friends. Maybe he didn't outright murder them, but maybe he just was responsible for some part of research that he just kept to himself, knowing that for him and his family to survive, he was going to need all of the supplies he could get his hands on. But hey, that's just a theory. I'm not going to say it's a game theory because it's not a game. But hey, MatPat's about to retire, so, even though nobody's going to watch this video, I'll make this a dedication to MatPat. How about that? Alright, guys. Well, if you made it to the end, I appreciate you for watching. If you want to, if you like the video, hit the like button. If you want to see more ramblings from me, hit the subscribe button. Just tell me how I'm doing. Tell me what I can do to improve. Just let me know. I've got a game capture in, so I should be able to get more games that aren't just, Xbox One games now. So hopefully I can have more interesting backgrounds. I'm hoping to keep this thing rolling every week. Every Thursday or Friday upload schedule is what I'm going to try to stick to. Like I said, whatever my work schedule permits, that's what it's going to be, either Thursday or Friday. I know technically last week's video was like late Wednesday night. But, like I said before, I'm going to try to keep to my weekly upload schedule. So, I appreciate everyone who's watched my videos up to this point. If I have any regular watchers by now, thank you for the support. I appreciate every view I get. If you want to discuss this theory, if you have heard or watched the story and you want to talk about it, leave a comment down in the section. And I'll talk to y'all later. God bless and have a great day.